All right, there's lots more we could do with adjusting text and that sort of thing. And if you go over some of the cheat sheets and guides to CSS, you'll see there's quite a bit more that we can do in that direction. But in terms of kind of theoretically, we've got the basics there. That is, we know how to attach things to particular items. So far, we've focused mainly on issues of attaching to tags, elements. And this time we'll look a little bit more closely at looking at IDs and classes and how to use those as selectors. We're also going to look at one of the two most fundamental pieces of how to arrange a layout, and that is kind of what the box model is. To start with the box model, let's go ahead and identify something we want to be focusing on during this section, and I'm just going to randomly choose the select design piece. What is that piece? I mean, I call it a piece. Well, it's not this, because that's just the span right inside there. And it's not the headline, the H3. It's not, what it is this, L-select. So what are we going to do with that? Well, let's go back real quick to our CSS sheet. And we'll go ahead and select that. Now, what do we do to select that particular chunk? We're trying to get this div. And you'll see here that it's an ID. And because it's an ID, we need to use the hash and say, which ID is it? It's L-select. So we're actually selecting L-select, confusingly enough. And what are we going to do with that? Well, let's start with just putting a border around it. Border style is border style solid. That means we want a solid line around the whole thing. I'm going to go ahead and just keep going back and forth to see what we're doing here. So we've just put a solid line all the way around it, see? Now, you may not have realized before that that's where the div is, but now you do. If you look right here, this is the div. It goes all the way over here to the right side. You might say to yourself, why is it going over to the right side? We're only going this far. This is going to become important later, but basically it fills as much space as it can. So it's a little bit like a bucket filling upside down. So it fills from the bottom to the top. Think about, I don't know, a bucket in space. That's probably a bad metaphor, but you basically, as you shove stuff into the page, it just fills up whatever space is available to it. So unless we limit it somehow, it's just going to fill across the whole page. And if we make the page narrower, it still fills up whatever is available. If we can make it as wide as we want, and it'll fill up that space. So by nature, elements, divs just kind of try to fill up whatever space they have available. Now we can say a little bit more about that. Solid is one of a number of choices we have. If we click on here, we can look at some of the others, including double, groove, ridge, inset, outset, and those aren't ones we need to look at. So dashed, dotted. All right, so we're going to use a solid one. We could also talk about the border width, and we'll make it 1px, which is for pixel. And let's do border color. Do you know what that color is? Let's see if you guessed correctly. It's RGB, so it's all blue. So we have a blue border around it. That could be a little confusing because it looks like you could somehow click on it, but that's okay. So we've done a border that's 1 pixel and goes all the way around it. Okay. Let's do a background color of yellow for now. So very Bumblebee, very Rams colors. We've got a blue line on the outside and yellow on the inside. This defines kind of a div, and right now you'll see there's very little space between the outside of this and the edge here. The S kind of bumps right into it. You can't really see here, but if we do this, you can see that this provides very little space between the top part and the bottom part. So now we need to talk about kind of how to constrain and shape this box, because being able to understand and control boxes, even when you don't see the boxes in such clear detail, is really important. So let's start with constraining how wide it can go. Without saying anything yet, it'll go as wide as there's room for. But let's go ahead and say we want to control that a little bit and say we only want it to go about 280 pixels. What happens when we do that? So now we've said there's the edge of the box. Now, unless we say otherwise, it's still going to kind of say, okay, we'll get to this in a minute, but it clears upwards. That is, it still says this is, even though I'm not using this space over here, I've kind of filled that part of the bucket. So it doesn't allow things over here unless we say something else, but for now we're going to leave that aside. But it does say, this is as far as I want this box to go. I only want it to be 300 pixels wide. I could constrain height too, but that gets a little fussy, because what if all the stuff doesn't fit in? What if I increase the size of these things? If I increase the size of my text, for example. And so I'm not going to mess with the height for now. I'm just going to deal with the width for the moment. Now, again, that S looks pretty close in there, and basically if this is a box, the box needs a little padding along the inside of it. Remember, padding always goes along the inside. How much? Let's just do padding, sometimes pixels, although often I will do, again, use the M measurement here. So this provides a bit of padding all the way around. Now, notice, I'll take that back out for a second. Notice that it's 300 wide here. When I add in the padding, it kind of spaces things out a bit. So we're already having a little bit of fussiness here, but note that we've got that was close in here, and we now have padding that goes around the inside. All right, so that's good for that, but what about right here where we have XML, CSS, 508, AAA all hugging this very closely? Well, maybe we need a little space, a little bit of margin on the outside. And that gives us space on all sides. All right. Now note that we don't have to do it on all sides. You can restrict these a bit. For example, we might say that we only want margin top of 2 pixels. And that way it goes back to the side here because it's just putting in margin here. You can do the same thing with padding, and you could do the same thing with border. So let's say we wanted a dashed one on the top. We could say border top 5 pixels dashed. Note what I've done there is I've actually brought it in and added 2 things on the same line. And you need to be a little careful about this, but you'll get a feel for it. It is possible to kind of collapse things and do them in shorthand. So for example, instead of saying border style, border width, border color, we could have just said border like that. So here we have, oh, and it's not border style anymore. So now it's just border, because obviously solid is the style, 1 pixel is the width, and blue is the color. So we didn't really need to say those explicitly. And in this case, it makes it much easier to say something like border top and say 5 pixel dash. What color is that going to be? We know it's going to be blue because we've already said what the border is for the whole thing. Same is true later on. We'll look at background. There's other things you can do with the background, not just color. And so you can kind of bring these together. As I said, margin top, we could do margin right, 0 pixels. Margin bottom is 2M. Margin left is 200 pixels. So here we've done the top, the right, the bottom, the left. And so we have 200 pixels over here, we have 2M's over here, I think we have 0 on here, and then we have a bottom, I forget what the bottom is, of 2M down here. So we've kind of said these all, but we can collapse these. This is a little trickier because you have to remember which goes in which place. You have to remember that you start with the top and then go around like a watch face. So it can be a little trickier, but it's not impossible. So we could say, in this case, margin, and then do each of the margins. And of course we could just do what we've done with padding here. And if you say padding in just 3M, it assumes you mean that for padding top, padding right, padding bottom, padding left. But if we wanted to specify it out, we can do that as well like that. Nothing's changed because we have the same right here. It should make clear here that, for example, if you wanted a horizontal rule, if you were trying to lay out things with nice crisp lines, you could do that mostly with borders. You don't really think about it, but usually those are borders on various divs on the page. This is kind of leading us into the next step, which is moving these boxes around. It's important to think of these divs, even if they don't have a border around them at any given time, as being boxes. Because we're going to start to, in the next section, arrange these boxes in the way you expect to. We're finally getting out of that train car version of, top this div, and then this div, then this div, and we'll be able to scrunch them up a bit so that it looks a little bit more like the kinds of pages you're used to. But to do that, you have to understand these divs as being boxes. All right, so next time we're going to get that box and kind of get it out of the path, have a pile up of the train or something like that. See you then.